Hello, today is day 3, Bengal and the British East India Company. We are moving into day 3 of empires and colonies, and as you may have noticed on our little screen here, we have gathered the Maratha Empire logo or seal or symbol or whatever you want to call it. It's a hint as to what is to come. As you recall, the first class of this unit, we talked about post-Napoleonic Europe and America. Then, on day 2, we shifted over to the Mughal Empire and religious diversity in India. Now we are continuing with the story of the Indian subcontinent and focusing on Bengal, one area of the Mughal Empire, and its interaction in the end in the East with the East India Company. So today we're going to be over here in this little red area. Here's our map. Question number 1. What was life like in the province of Bengal during the Mughal Empire? So, the Mughal Empire controlled most of what is today India, and Bengal is just this little province here. And when you think of Bengal, it's associated with a lot of things. It might be associated with certain foods or certain people that you know, but for many Americans, it's mostly symbolized by the Bengal tiger. There we over here. Also, for many Americans, we get the word bungalow, the kind of house, from the kind of homes that were in Bengal. A bungalow is a standalone house, detached from other houses, not an apartment, but it's also not really like a tall mansion. It's a low house, often very spread out with a porch, like the one in this picture. Bengal is a region in the eastern part of the Mughal Empire and is best known in this time period. We're talking about the 1500s through the 1800s. It's best known in this time period for its production of cotton cloth, silk cloth, and also shipbuilding, which assisted them in trade. The production of cotton cloth and silk cloth made it a very, very wealthy region. You can see in some of these pictures here, the traders holding bundles of cloth. This is a picture of woven Bengali cloth. They were famous for their fine cottons and also their fine silks. Bengal was extremely productive and also extremely profitable. This graph that's mostly cropped out here shows us the GDP of various countries. And if you look at the GDP of 1500, 1600, and 1700, you can see that India makes up this large proportion of global GDP, far surpassing that of Japan or France or the US. But most importantly, and part of the reason why some of this is cut off here is less important, is that just looking proportionally, half of India's GDP in the years up to here, 1800, half of this pinkish color would be coming from Bengal alone. So Bengal alone, if it's producing half of the productivity of India in, say, 1600, Bengal by itself is outproducing Japan or France. Bengal during the Mughal Empire, thus, you could conclude, is a very prosperous place. People are living nice lives, lives of wealth, lives of luxury. There was a lot of trade and a lot of business and a lot of money. And relative to other regions of the Mughal Empire, it was relatively wealthy. This brings us to the conflict between the Mughals and the Marathas. So the Mughal Empire doesn't last forever, and by the time you get to the 1700s and the 1750s, the Maratha Empire is starting to take over more and more of India. The Mughal Empire in this map in the green is receding, and the Maratha Empire in the yellow is increasing. The question is, what effect did this conflict between Mughals and Marathas have on Bengal? Well, the short answer is that Bengal found itself trapped between two giant empires. And Bengal was, in the process, invaded several times. The Maratha were looking to expand and conquer Bengal for its wealth. But the Mughals were looking to keep Bengal in their empire for its prosperity and wealth. During the course of these wars, especially between the years 1741 and 1751, the Marathas invaded Bengal at least 6 different times. On the left-hand side, we have some images of Maratha warriors. This kind of warfare is mostly not using guns. It's still mostly cavalry, swords, war horses, war elephants, things like that. One time in particular, mercenaries were hired by the Maratha army to attack and plunder Bengali towns. These mercenaries are sometimes called pindaris. They're soldiers for hire. They are hired to attack, and they kind of have no loyalty to one side or the other. The pindaris were more prone to loot and to steal because they were in the job for the money, not for the cause. The picture on the bottom right symbolizes the death and destruction of Bengali towns under one of these attacks. Over 400,000 civilians were killed in one of the Maratha invasions. Homes, warehouses, weaving tools, stocks of silk fabrics, etc., were destroyed. Unfortunately for Bengal, these repeated attacks weakened the region significantly. At the same time that the Marathas are invading, Bengal also sees the arrival of the British, the French, and the Dutch in large numbers, wanting to trade and do business. So the British arrive in Bengal in the midst of all of the chaos of the wars between the Marathas and the Mughals. The British East India Company had set up trade in Bengal. The Mughal government had given the British East India Company permission to trade in Bengal, and the British East India Company was already being aggressive. All the way back in the 1680s, the British were trying to take over entire Bengali towns and had been repulsed, had been pushed back. But now that the Bengalis were a little preoccupied with fighting the Marathas, the British tried again. By the 1690s, the British East India Company arranged to lease 3 towns in order to trade near one of the towns called Calcutta. They demolished sections of the towns and built a fort illegally called Fort William. I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat that. The British leased, as in long-term rent, they rented 3 Bengali towns, and near one that's called Calcutta, they tore down large chunks of the town to build a fort. They didn't have permission to build the fort, and Nawab means governor in the Mughal Empire, and so the Nawab, Siraj ud-Dowlah, was really upset by this. You can see him in the picture on the left. Siraj ud-Dowlah was also increasingly upset with the British and their illegal dealings. The British did illegal smuggling of products in and out of Bengal, and they also protected Bengali criminals inside their fort. They cleared the land around the fort, as you can see in this picture. It's labeled Esplanade. That's an area of open grassland where they could see people coming just in case the Bengalis wanted to attack. One other thing that the British did in order to protect themselves and their illegal actions inside Bengal is they built their own private army. On the bottom right, you can see an imagined drawing of Robert Clive, who was a official for the British East India Company. He hired his own private army full of sepoy soldiers. What is a sepoy soldier? A sepoy soldier is an Indian soldier hired by the British to fight against the Indians. So Robert Clive was going to eventually lead his sepoy army in a battle at the Battle of Plassey, where he would fight the Nawab, Siraj Uddaula, for control of Bengal. So let's go back. What did the British East India Company do to upset the Bengali Nawabs? Well, they attacked a town without warning. They rented some towns, tore property down, and built a fort illegally. They sheltered illegal traders. They sheltered Bengali criminals. They did illegal smuggling and illegal trading. They built their own private army, and they camped out near the town of Calcutta in their own fort that they had built illegally. Eventually, Nawab Siraj Uddaula and his Bengali government would be sick and tired of the British behavior, and they would attack. What is the Black Hole of Calcutta, and why was it used in British propaganda? If you recall, Fort William was a British fort built by British people inside Bengal. The British attacked the Bengalis with their hired army of sepoy soldiers. In a number of battles, at first the Bengalis won, and they took over Fort William. On the bottom left is a drawing of what the inside of Fort William looked like. And you can see on the diagram that the black hole was a sort of dungeon prison in the corner of one area of the fort. The Bengalis captured the British fort and imprisoned British soldiers inside their own dungeon. Then, somehow, overnight, some of the prisoners died. The details are much debated. But what we do know is that the British used this as an opportunity to create propaganda, to create a legend, to create a story that was lies about how the evil Bengalis shoved far too many innocent British people into a small space and left them there to suffocate and die in terror and in blackness. The two images on the right are just some of the many propaganda type images that were circulated to make the Bengalis and the Indians and the people of Calcutta seem horrible. You can see these heavily armed soldiers in the foreground on the top right, shoving what looked like innocent civilian people into some kind of prison. You have these fancy dressed women, men in wigs, etc. That is, in all likelihood, not the people who were imprisoned. It was most likely to be captured soldiers, prisoners of war. So they would not be dressed in their finery, they would not be wearing wigs, and there would not be women among them. On the bottom right is supposed to be the chaos and panic of the people who were shoved in so tightly together that they suffocated to death in fear. That also is not true. There was not enough people held in the black hole for it to be that crowded. Yes, it probably was hot. Yes, it did feel stifling. And yes, some prisoners did die. However, historians have pointed out that captured prisoners of war are often injured and insufficiently bandaged. It's possible that many of these people were weak from the battle already and would have died regardless of the conditions they were held in. So how is this used as British propaganda? Well, the prisoners that survived were freed and told their story, and the British circulated this propaganda widely across Asia and back at home in Europe to show how savage, how uncivilized, how brutal, how terrible the Indian people were, especially the Bengalis. And it was used as justification for the British to take over India, to take it over and make it better, to make it more civilized, to make it more nice, to make it more refined. The British used the Black Hole of Calcutta as propaganda to make the Indian soldiers seem like animals. That's the end. One side note, if you've gotten this far, if we go back to the British East India Company upsetting the Bengali Nawabs, one side note that I just remembered, Nawab Siraj Uddoula was assisted in his fight against Robert Clive by French soldiers because this was happening during the 7 Years' War. Remember that? While the British were fighting the French in America and in Europe, the French came to India to help the Bengalis fight the British and their Indian army. So the story just gets more and more complicated. And now we're done.